Okay.
Well, I've been told by many people that it's more proper to send your guest a question so you don't throw them off and then they have time to answer the questions.
Okay. All right. But here's my question. So there's a few packages I want to open here. One is, do we send them at all? But two is, okay. Again, I'm hosting now, but sometimes I'd work with a podcast that didn't know me real well. And I'm kind of telepathically wishing they would move your question here. Here's what you want to ask me. So sometimes what I'm doing as a host is I'll give them sample questions, but to say, John, I don't know you real well, but I know you've got some space there. Are there some questions that would feed into some topics that you'd want to get into? So I give them the opportunity to create some of their own questions. Obviously, we're going to talk about this. I go deeper, but what do you think about that idea?
That sounds a great idea. I mean, I was also told a lot of times you don't even need questions, that the guest will come up with something, and that will be what the topic of the show will
All right,
be.
John, ye of multiple interviews.
Yes.
Jump in on this one.
I did 5 interviews last week, and one of them, I tried to ask what topic. They wouldn't tell me what they want to talk about. So I got in the studio, and I said, well, what do you want to talk about? He said, let's do software testing. So I did an hour on software testing. But I always prefer to have questions ahead of time. In fact, what I do is I record the questions ahead of time on Audacity, and I rehearse. And I'll probably rehearse for 2 hours with 13 questions, and listen. And then I get a transcript, and I make sure I enunciate every word and make sure my syllabus come through. And so I'm kind of compulsive about that. Now, most of my interviews are with companies, and as far as questions goes, I don't want to ask someone like, Rob, how many felony convictions do you have in Pennsylvania? And then, so I can't jump. Last week, I had a guy who's at the CIA for 8 years, and he's working for a software company now. And I said, well, what topics can I not add? What do I have to avoid? And so he told me what to avoid. So I always do it ahead of time, and I rehearse, and I never talk about me. That right. never in the part of conversation. It's about them and the CIA. And so and so it's a different world, and because I think I have a business podcast, and people listen not to hear my adventures. They don't care. They just want to know about disaggregation in software development system, or they talk about satellite communication methods, and so that's all they want to talk about. So that's what they hear. So that's me. I don't know about you, Rob, but I think different levels of conversation. If it's a more personal podcast, personally driven, versus, Larry King never prepared anything ever. I mean, he famously never read the books either. So I'll read the book.
Okay. And then I want everybody else jumping in, but I'm going to tell you my system right now after a whopping year and a quarter of hosting a podcast. So I'm a newbie, but I've settled into a system of giving my guests the opportunity to look through some samples, send me some questions if they like. In other words, you tell me. But the big thing that I'll do, John, because I don't want to show up with a blank sheet of paper. I'll take, if they're not giving me questions, I'll work some up. If they are, I'll have them there. But my secret sauce is I actually change my color, look over the questions beforehand, and at least anticipate a second level question, a third level question. And I don't always get to them, but I put them in red. So I got the question. I'm listening. I'm often taking notes, always in red, so I can spot it. But this is the only thing I really have to offer today from me, is that I think the best podcasts I've had are not just firing questions at guests. It's firing a question at a guest and then being agile enough to say, hey, John, that's a really good point. Let's go a little deeper. Now, when you did that, was there this? In other words, not just go, okay, next question. So it feels like a conversation.
Yeah.
I
mean, thoughts? Like with me, Rob, what I do is when I have my questions, I'll have it like you color coded. First half will be in blue, and that means personal.
Yeah.
Then in red, which means more off the wall kind of questions.
Yeah.
And so I know, and I'll say, listen, the first half of my questions will be a little personal. We'll get to know you, and then we'll get more thought provoking. So you have an idea what's coming up.
Got it.
How about
Good.
Alex? How about you? I just want to hear what Alex does. I don't know Alex at all. Tell me about your podcast and what kind of questions you ask Alex.
Sure. My podcast is called the HDP Podcast. It's hard work, determination, and perseverance. So I'll take. I just started it. So I'm looking for guests in sports, personal development, business. It can run the gamut, but I want people who have succeeded, but who have also stumbled along the way. And I was originally going to call it HDPS, setbacks and perseverance. But I didn't want that negative connotation to affect people's input into it. So I think one of the things that I've tried to do, and I've only interviewed 2 people at this point, both of whom I've known, but both of whom have fit my profile. So I'm really now working to try to get people that are going to take this to the next level. And Reed, I kind of like one of the things you said, and that is what I've tried to do is I've tried to start off easy, we'll say.
Yeah.
And then I have, we'll call it a few off the wall questions to try to loosen them up. And then I have the really deep stuff if we're even able to get into it. If they're not willing or time doesn't permit or whatever, or it just doesn't go in that direction and it's not the right fit. I don't want to do that, but I like the off the wall questions. I think this is a great forum to ask a few off the wall questions and see if that can get, we'll say, deeper into what they've accomplished.
Yeah. See, the reason I use off the wall questions is they're thought provoking questions. They give your guests a chance to give the audience more of an inside depth look at themselves. And so the audience can listen to them answer it, and they'll give them a peek inside how their mind thinks.
Give us a quick example of an off the wall question, Reed.
If you had a billboard, what would you have on it, and and why?
Okay.
All right. Or if you can go back in time and talk to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell them and why?
See, I'm trying to tell a story in a sense. So, and it's the writer in me. I want sort of a beginning and a middle and an end. So I struggle with that, and everybody has their own style. I struggle with that only because I'm not sure where it fits into the story of my guests sometimes, but but that's the nature of everybody's podcast. They're different. Mine's more of a business. Meg Robinson, nice to meet you. Welcome aboard. Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Hi, I'm sorry I'm late. You started at 9:30, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So my podcast is, it's an interview format, and I call it the Meg Robinson Show, and it is geared towards people who have a really interesting life story, and they're all across the board. So I've interviewed a Holocaust survivor. I've interviewed a woman in her 60s who's online dating, and a radiologist who's an artist as well. And it's based on his radiology. So it's just people I come across who I find interesting. So I do the interview, and then I do a lot of pretty heavily, I edit very heavily, which is another topic which I'd like to talk about at some point. And then I'm a composer, so I write the music to go with the interview. So it's original music. And so in the case of let's say this survivor, he was Greek, he is Greek. And so I used a balalaika and tried to use instruments that would kind of enhance the atmosphere of the interview.
Wow.
So that's what I've been doing. Now, I have not been producing a podcast. It's been a couple of years. I kind of burned out because it was so heavy work wise for me. It just really, I found it sort of difficult. And now I'm trying to go back and reassess what I want to do. And I think with AI, which is going to give me a decent transcript of the interview, I think the editing process is going to be made easier. So I'm kind of trying to ease my way back into it.
Good. Just as a thought, by the way, now I'm with the music and everything, I can certainly see why you're looking for that topic on editing. So, but maybe we'll put that one up for next month. Just as an aside, and we'll move on. Robert Miller would be a really good guest for you, and I can make that connection. Really interesting guy. Came kind of from nowhere in his late 60s, early 70s with #1 hit music, and just sort of back into the music industry from out of nowhere. And it's really a cool story. So
Michael Fortune would be another one too.
Okay. All right. Bridget, I met you, but I didn't hear your story.
Hello. I'm just starting, but my podcast is an interview style. Also, it is the discovery of what Maryland film and television industry has to offer their local film, our local filmmakers, and those in the industry. It's to really help connect everyone here. It feels so isolated at times. Also bringing in more business to Maryland and how what we have here can generate nationally and internationally.
Excellent. Well, welcome aboard. And the cool thing about this little group that has been forming is that we're all over the board. We got newbies, we got some real grizzled vets there. We'll get to Charlie in a second. And then everybody kind of in the middle. So you found your way to a good place. We'll take good care of you. And
good.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Good. And speaking of grizzled vets, Charlie, good to see you.
Good to be seen, I guess. So, hi, everybody. How are you?
We're fine, Charlie. We didn't interrupt you or anything, Charlie, did we?
No, I just wanted to make sure I was muted so I wouldn't interrupt anybody. Rob knows I talk too much. No, it's great to be here this morning and meet everyone from Podcast Village, what was, it was now Podville Media. So, Rob, I'm working on my book.
So, Charlie, tell us about interviewing. And this whole theme is interviewing techniques. What are your techniques? What are successful in your world?
John, when I did launch podcast, which was the first show that I did for when I started the studio in Gaithersburg, I did an interview style, and you're very kind. All of you are probably better interviewers than I am. I found for my personal style, I can tell you guys how I feel about it. I think the most important thing is to listen to your guest and be responsive, not be reading notes and then not know what your guest just said. I only allowed myself 5 words on a piece of paper because I'm very distracted all the time. And I just wanted to listen and ask good questions. And when I got stumped, I'd let my eyes go down and let that prompt me. Everybody else is going to work differently, but that's how I worked. I had sessions, guys and ladies, sorry, guys is everybody, with people who came in with full scripts. We have a client who does it today. I hate it. The full script, I had a lawyer my first year and he came in and read 2 pages of single spaced type. It was the most dull thing in the world. So to answer one other part, John, is when I started out, I didn't have a time, it's a podcast. So we're not 15 minutes. We're not a half an hour. We can go as long as we want. So somebody asked me early on, how long will this be? And I said, as long as you and I are interesting. So I tried to make it interesting for the listener. So if I'm boring myself, then holy crap, I did, I'll leave his name out, but I did a whole bunch of stuff with a guy who speaks locally. He's a good friend of mine. He's a really good speaker. He never, ever needs a single edit because he never says one word out of place. He's got this stuff totally memorized and it's so dull. It's so dull. It doesn't
Charlie?
have any spark. If I'm going to engage Reed, I'm going to look him in the eye. I'm going to try and hear what he's passionate about, and that's it for me. So that's kind of my whole, shtick, guys.
Charlie,
Sorry.
it's like me. I've had guests who want to come on my show and go, how long does it take? I'm like, it depends on you, how long you can talk about your topic. And once you're done, you're done. And then it's up to me to figure out how to fill that gap.
Yeah. I love what you just said there, Charlie. Also, I wrote a piece a couple years ago that I really liked. It was called "The Pursuit of Imperfection." And I just love, that's what I mean. To me, we all have our style and that should be celebrated. There isn't a right or wrong way, vive la différence. But my style is, I want it to be like we're sitting at Starbucks having a cup of coffee, talking about your topic. And that doesn't work for some people. It doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just, we have to be true to who we are. And I think that's one of the mistakes that people make is they'll see something, they'll go, well, I want to be like Alex, and then they'll try and, be a kind of a bad copy of Alex. It's so, anyway.
So true. I think that's so true. And,
Rob,
and that's true when you're trying to be a musician or anything. You've got to cultivate your own style. And it's true of everybody on this Zoom call. Everybody in this room has their own personal style. And you got to throw as much fertilizer and water on that as possible and make it interesting. It still has to be what Reed said. If it's boring, I'm going to turn the microphone off, period. It's not worth it. So
good.
Rob,
all right.
I mean, I've been told one of the best ways to do things is a day in the life. Everyone loves that because people want to hear a day in the life of that person because that's what makes them interesting.
And again, that is your style.
Yeah.
And that works for you. That's good. Okay. Sounds good.
Just getting back to something Charlie said about the lack of notes in what you're doing. And I've struggled with that because I think the more I carefully plan the interview, the less good it is. I think in some ways, I mean, I do the preparation, but I think there's a word that comes to mind, and that's organic. And if the conversation is organic, it has to flow from the interviewee and what they're saying. And you have to pick up on things they say. And a lot of times, the best interviews are the ones where it goes in a place you didn't expect it to go.
Absolutely.
They say something, maybe it's even a side comment or whatever, and you pick up on that, which is listening to the interviewee, as you're saying, Charlie. But the only downside of doing that is the less structured the interview is, the more work you need to do afterwards to piece it together. And it's not always sequential to the interview or to the story. So you can move around both in time that they're telling the story and go from the middle out if it's the most organic and the most interesting to do that. I just wanted to make that point.
No, that's good.
Hey, Rob, I got a question for the whole group here. This is a generic question about interviewing. Is the open? I've listened to hundreds of podcasts, and a lot of people blow the opening, so they don't have that hook. I mean, you get someone like Rob, he gets on there. Yeah, this is Rob. This is the swimming podcast, and so I've heard a lot of
you. What's going on there? What happened? Do I have to control you as the host?
No, usually what happens is, let's say someone like Rob. No, this is what'll happen. Hey, this is Rob, the running podcast, and I bought some new shoes yesterday, and they were green shoes. And then I met my buddy Reed down the hall, and they ramble on and on. I think if you're going to start. So Alex, my advice to you, if you're going to start this, just say, hey, Alex, this is a podcast. We're going to talk about people overcoming obstacles. Okay, look at Rob. I mean, when you start your podcast, your interview technique should be hit hard, grab the attention. I see so many people, especially after 4 or 5 podcasts, they get so comfortable. They ramble like I'm doing now.
Well, Rob knows how I introduce. I really give my guest a really good introduction. I build them up.
That's not it. It's the hit. It's the hook. They don't care about it. It's the hook. What have you overcome, Alex? I was in a pool once and a guy had no legs and he was beating me in the pool. What have you overcome, Alex? Rob, did you know that 10 people a day die of drowning? Did you know that, Rob?
Well, and I, by the way, I love that hook. And remember, we have our own style, but I have I have an intro and an outro, right? Yep. And so I throw in the hook. I try and keep it to 2 or 3 sentences. Have you ever thought about such and such? Well, let's have ourselves a pocket-sized pep talk and find out. Bang comes the intro. Then comes the intro.
I want to
of
hear.
the
I want to hear
guest.
Charlie on this. Charlie sees hundreds of
that's
them. So tell me,
yeah,
Charlie, what are your thoughts
I
on the
just
intro?
wanted to, I just wanted to chime in on the other side of what I do and give and speak for Fred Diamond. Do you guys know Fred? I'm
Yes.
sure I've told this story
Everybody
on
knows
the show
Fred.
before.
Nope, I don't.
The Fred does the Sales Game Changers podcast. You have to Changers. That's my way of poking fun at Fred. He does a wonderful job. He does exactly the opposite of what I do. So he started out, I love this story, and I've asked him if I can tell it this way, and he's okay with it. He started out not using a podcast to be heard, but to open doors. So how many times can you get in saying, hi, Meg, I want to come in and sell you something or tell you what a great guy I am. Instead, I'm going to call up and say, hi, Meg, I'd like to come in and interview you in your office at your own time about your stuff and how great you are and about your theories of your success. Fred has 15 questions that he asks every one of these. He used to do 5 a week. It was a door opener. Now he's an award-winning podcaster. But as opposed to what I do, he can take those 15 questions. He built a whole training academy around it. He's getting consulting gigs. He could write a book because he did 100 interviews with the same subset of 15 questions. Imagine if we all did that, how many books we could write, how many things we could generate out of that body of work. So I think Fred's approach is brilliant, and I don't do that. I like what Meg was saying. I like to look in you. I do a golf podcast. Please don't bother with it. But I used to be in the industry, so I know how to talk agronomics, and I do all this stuff. So I just see who I'm interviewing 2 minutes before. I jump in, and I do it the Charlie way. That's it. But I like Fred's approach because his. Sorry, go ahead, Meg.
No, I'm sorry. Finish what you were saying.
I just like Fred's approach because he didn't do it on purpose, but he was telling me the story, and he was the end of the story is he was in somebody's office one day and they just spent $30,000 on some consulting, and Fred was on his way out the door and he said, "Hey, Fred, what do you think about this? We just did this for 3 days." And he says, "Well," and he went, based on the 15 questions and the 100 interviews. And they said, "Holy crap, we should have just hired Fred." So I think it's really interesting what he does. And I think we can all apply variations of that. I do not do it because I'm just not organized and I like winging it.
Well, I agree with Charlie. I'm the same way. I'm not as organized. I just jump right in and just go right to it.
Go ahead, Meg. You were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say that in terms of a hook, which John talked about, and I think that's super important. Sometimes I will take, when the interview's over with and I'm doing the editing, I will take a really interesting thing that person said, and I'll lead with the guest and that comment. And so you've got your hook built in because you're listening. Why did the person say that? And so you can lift something from the interview that doesn't give too much away, but still, entices the listener to listen.
Like it. How many of you? Now I'm gonna leave that. I'll leave that on the table. John, you said something earlier, and it's something that I suffer from. So I'm curious, is there a cure? I have to watch it to not talk too much, to not talk about myself frequently. Go figure. I've got guests talking about things that I know about. Other than a sign that says "shut up" on your computer, how do some of you kind of balance? I don't want to be silent, and I don't want to dominate the conversation. How do you handle that? Go ahead,
Real
Reed.
quick. I'll go quick, Reed. My first client, Jeff Miller, I always let him hear the podcast because I was so new before I posted it. And his wife would always come back and say, "Could you please ask Charlie to take out the personal stories?" So I like my little anecdotes, Rob, and I've had to train myself to just not say the damn little anecdotes and try to focus on my guest. I will come in with a personal thing once in a while, but I've tried to train myself to not, because I started out doing it like nuts. So sorry, go ahead, Reed.
Well, with me, Rob would know, since I interviewed him, usually I wait for something that relates to me. If nothing relates to me, I just keep quiet.
Yeah.
Well, Rob, here's a technique I use all the time. What I do is I'll do research on someone. I'll type in Rob Joels on YouTube and I'll listen to an interview and I'll write down a quote. I'll have 5 quotes. And during the middle of the interview, I'll read the quote and I said, "Who said this?" He said, well, and once you talk, that really gets them thinking about what they said and why they said, and put that in perspective. And so if you could bring up, you wrote an article 3 weeks ago, Rob, on swimming in Chesapeake Bay, and you said that blah, blah, blah. And that gets the person to talk more. And I think it's just the more person, if you can get something that's distinctive about their own background, a quote, something they wrote, something happened to them. Oh, by the way, Alex, I saw you're in the Marines for 5 years. Does that impact your podcast at all? And LinkedIn tells me all kinds of. I do a LinkedIn profile on Charlie, and we go 5 interviews a week for 2 months. So hey, Charlie, your second felony conviction, Charlie. What was it? I mean,
I don't talk about that on podcasts.
So Rob, that's the technique I use. Go to YouTube and see and quote them and say, who wrote this? Who said this?
I would love to blame this on my guests. I really would. It's so much, but I have to tell you, it's usually me. My guests are fine. I really do think they do a pretty good job. It's me because remember, mentioned earlier, my I made this up, but my style, the Starbucks style. I'll give it that's the name of my style of a conversation sitting almost like didn't Seinfeld have like comedians in cars getting coffee or something?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he still got that show.
And I think it some of it is actually in a restaurant, and I love the feel of that. He's interviewing, but he's also talking, and so it's me. I'm the problem, but daggone it, I'm interesting. And
Rob, I mean, the issue is you're just so high energy. It's your energy.
Thank you for laughing, Alex. No one else laughed at that at all.
I was not going to laugh at that.
But therein lies the problem. I do want a cadence of both of us talking. I just don't want to. And Charlie said it really well. I don't want to jump in with my stories. You got a story. Wait to hear my story. That's the one that's poison to me. I don't need to do that.
Yeah,
we all have friends like that anyway. Yeah. We don't need to listen to it on a podcast. So, I mean, I do. I can't speak for all you guys, but I certainly do.
Charlie, I would love to have you on my podcast.
Well, I can be had very easily, Reed. But John, I call what you were talking about the Hot Ones method, because if you watch that show, Sean, whatever his name is, he just does basic freaking research, and all of his guests are shocked that they know so much about him because it did just what John said. They looked him up. They looked up his Facebook or high school yearbook it's not that hard. Nobody does research anymore. I think the basic research, John, I will add to the stuff that I do in the second before I do my golf podcast. I look him up on his website because none of these guys have done interviews, and I make sure I read his profile on his website.
Yeah.
And most people don't do that.
Yeah.
Well, it is amazing. I'm going to tie into everything I think everybody has said here, and that is, it's amazing now that I'm in a different seat, interviewing and wanting to interview people, that you notice how you notice different interview techniques. And John, I had never known that about Larry King before, but one of the guys I've always enjoyed listening to interviews is Howard Stern.
Oh yeah.
And I think what you guys are saying is he does his research on guests like nobody else. And you can say he's talking throughout the interview, but he's talking in leading questions. He's not talking and telling stories about himself or getting sidetracked on things. It's basically to butter up the guests to get them to divulge things that they wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why he's called a shock jock.
Well, he's also called the king of media. And Alex, I've been listening to him since I was 21, and when he was at DC 101. So, he's evolved, and I'd love to have the team behind me too that's doing that research. Exactly. But he does not shy. He doesn't run out of questions. I think he does open people up and keep himself out of it for the most part. So he really is. He's got a unique style that has mellowed through the years, but it is extremely effective. Yesterday, I don't know if anybody heard it yesterday. He interviewed Martin Short and Steve Martin, and it really could be used in a university because those are two very powerful characters, and to be able to sidestep and step out of their way is really an art. And it's something like I said, I envy. I struggle with that.
Talk about another great person who interviews. I mean, what about the great Terry Gross on NPR?
Oh yeah, she's
done many interviews, and she's known throughout the world as the best.
Yeah.
I agree.
I have an experiment like in a week, and you're going to laugh, but I'm actually going to see. I wonder if this will work. I had a client that wanted to talk about something and said, could you do a podcast? It's a certain sales issue that she's struggling with, and that's my area. So I said, well, I could do an hour consult. I find a guest to talk about that, but why don't you come on the show and interview me on that? I'll talk to you about it. I'll tell you how to sell that in that particular scenario. But it just was going to be too awkward to interview her on how you sell in that area when she doesn't know the answer and she's coming to me. But I did sort of lean back sheepishly and went and thought, it'd be kind of interesting, not every podcast, but to have people come on. I write books about sales. Go ahead, bring it on. What do you need to know? What's your and try and categorize. But I don't know. I wonder if it'll work for the host to be interviewed.
Rob, that's the same thing I have done. I asked one of my friends, I'm like, hey, why don't you come on my show and we reverse the roles? Yeah. You'll ask me the same questions I ask everyone else, and this will give people an inside view of me.
Yeah. I don't know.
Actually,
we'll see how it goes.
Charlie, what do you got to say?
Rob, on a show we have here called Power Station by Ann Pasmanic, really wonderful show. Twice in her 180 episodes, Rob Ford, one of my main engineers, has interviewed her about her. And they're really, I don't think they're as listened to as much, but she's had an amazing career. So we around the studio think those are really cool episodes. So I think it's fun. I think it's nice for the interviewer to get interviewed sometimes. I think it's really healthy.
I wanted to go back to this issue of doing research. And it's definitely important to do the research and know the details. But I sort of have a rule about that, at least in mind, that I try not to have to discuss things that are already out there. I mean, in other words, if someone can go and research someone that they're having as a guest, and get all this information, I think to regurgitate that or to somehow include that is a little bit dangerous, because the question is, what value are you bringing to the table if everything you talk about is already out there in the public domain? So you have to have, I think, a little bit of a take or a twist or something to it that brings something that is not already known. And I interviewed it. I did a 4-part series on a FBI agent who had been through some major events in history, like the blowing up of the I'm blocking the name now, blowing up of the building in Oklahoma City. And there's a lot of information known about that, but he was on the scene. So I tried to focus on his particular take on that. And you have to give enough information so people understand what you're talking about, because there may be people who don't know about that event. But on the other hand, if it's too researched and too much of what you're saying is out there in the public domain, I think that's maybe not necessarily a good way to go either.
And again, you can see that, a lot of this has to do with style. I have a question for you. How often do you disagree with your guest? And when you do, I'm assuming we're all doing it gently, but I'm curious how we handle that when you're getting something out there and you just flat out feel it's bad information.
Well, that's opinion or fact. If someone has an opinion, that's fine. I don't care. But if they factually state that it was the John Gilroy building in Oklahoma City, then you got to draw the line as some facts. So, and I think people have all kinds of opinions and different things, but they just can't factually make statements that aren't accurate. I mean, how many terabits a second can an optical cable handle? I mean, if it's 42 terabits, it's 42. It's not 20. So it's got to be very specific. So what's your opinion about optical? That's one thing, but a specific fact or something. But I do a lot of these technical things, and so I don't do the.
Okay. All right. But let's make the question tougher. I'm disagreeing with somebody's opinion. I don't think their opinions. I mean, and and as the corporate trainer in me knows that, to sort of feel, felt, founded, or do. I mean, I don't know if you ever heard that technique.
Oh, I sure have.
Rob, I'll throw the question at you. If you had a guest on your show, they said something you disagreed with, would you speak up about it? Would you tell them, I disagree with it?
Well, here's the thing. I would never use the words "I disagree with it," but I would disagree with it. So meaning, I think there's a very gentle approach to saying, Reed, a lot of people feel the same way about that in terms of the building or whatever. When I first started studying it, I actually felt that way too. What I found was that, and so it's a nice, that's John knows exactly what I'm doing, but that is an approach in sales, particularly for me, of disagreeing with my client without getting their ego involved. And throwing empathy at it, and that feeling the same way too, and then providing what I've found or what I believe. So I think that's my technique. I just can't, I can't take every sales technique and keep crowbarring them into podcasting. So that's why I'm throwing it out to the panel going, that one worked there too? I don't know.
I had a weird thing. I was interviewing someone who was basically cheating, had told a story of how they were this woman was cheating on her husband. And part of me wanted to weigh in on what she was doing because it was appalling to me. And I thought, if I don't weigh in, people are going to think I condone what she's saying. And so I had to walk this weird tight line between, it's very strange. I was in a very strange place where I didn't want to come across as condoning it. And I didn't want to come across as being critical because I was trying to get her story. So that was a little weird. And I think in the end, I would, I decided to ask some questions like, well, did you think about this? And what did you feel about that? And sort of to try, but it was still, I was trying to remain kind of neutral. But I'm not neutral about
that. Meg, that's the poster child of where I'm at on this. Yeah, that's a tough one. Somebody says, a rain gives me the wrong color in the rainbow. I don't really care. Like the world's going to keep rotating. But that's an amazing story, an example of something that I couldn't leave it be either. I just couldn't. Assuming someone's listening to us, you're absolutely right. Again, I have 40 years of seminar delivery. If somebody brings something like that up in a seminar and I don't do something with it, I am, in a sense, agreeing with what they just said. So that is a really tough one. Real quick, but in the seminar world, it's super easy to handle that. And the way you do it is it's called a relay. You basically relay it to the room and go, that's very interesting. How do the rest of you feel about this? I do not agree. It's like, well, blame Charlie. I was just, moving the conversation here. But one-on-one in a podcast, I can't relay it anywhere. So I would have done personally, I would have done exactly what you did. I would have been tactful and probably asked. Sometimes I think, and again, in the seminar world, people will say things like that, but they've misunderstood the question or they're not making their point properly. So I don't think your situation's that way, by the way, Meg, but a lot of times we can get out of jail by just asking a couple more questions and you realize they're using the wrong word or they didn't really mean it that way. But from your example, I muted myself because I was going on my side of how I would deal with that.
I was doing that inside, but didn't, show.
Anyway, all right. So that's interesting. What other techniques? Got it. Go, John.
I got tons.
Yeah.
I've had the benefit of having an engineer in the other room for decades and yelling and screaming at me. And a lot of people have crutches. And Charlie can probably list 50 crutches that people have. So, Charlie, where were you born? So, Charlie, do you like the raisin? Hey, so, Charlie, you like baseballs? This right. So I hear a lot. And a lot of times you're doing a podcast, you don't even realize you're saying it. But another person, maybe Reed or Alex or Rob, can go, oh, by the way,
Right.
You know, in public speaking, you scratch your head or something, but they have these crutches used all the time. And so this is my notes on improving your interview skills: is have someone who hates you listen to your podcast and say, well, what do you think of it? Your next door neighbor, I don't know, someone who doesn't listen to podcasts, and they can give you a real honest opinion about that. Maybe they'll say, hey, Rob, you talk too much. But if you can get a disinterested party say something, ask Charlie, maybe, oh, Rob, you say so too much. That's what all the millennials say. So I went and got a latte. So I went downstairs. So Charlie, crutches.
I don't need the enemy. I have a wife and 2 children to listen, and they're more critical than my worst enemy, who is also my best friend. So I think John's absolutely right, though. I do. You just reminded me of something I called the factor. I did an interview once with a guy who was half of Mr. Beams, if you know those flashlights for your closet. And I sent it to him, and he said, God, I wish I hadn't said so many times. So I sat right down and I took him out, and it took me 2 hours before I learned a shortcut to a quick edit, quick cut, but he said 90 times in a half an hour. So it's not really relevant to what you were saying, John, but we do have those crutches. The thing I wanted to add, though, that you did make me think of, John, is the engineer. Many of our clients rely heavily on Rob Ford and Rob Spiewak and our other engineers, who will say, okay, that was great, but I need you to do it with a different amount of enthusiasm, and I need to get a second take on the way you said that question. We will also isolate, as you guys were both, I think John and Rob, you're both talking about the pre-intro. I don't know what we call that, the hook before the intro, right? We will also do those with the help of the editor in the studio or making social media assets. And he'll say, okay, Rob, that was great. And when you talked about how you created that idea, I want you to say that again, and we'll capture that as one single recording. So sometimes, I guess what I'm trying to say is, sometimes when you have the opportunity to work with an engineer, they're able to help, they're able to complement the process. Just think of something maybe that you forgot. Hey, did you remember to ask Rob about, how long it's been since he's combed his hair, something like that. So sorry, Rob. Those too easy.
I keep picking up shrapnel in this conversation. Bob swimming in the bay. Rob is doing
shining off my forehead. So
I could grow hair. I choose not to.
I got to get different lighting in this room because I'm losing all my hair. All right, I've embarrassed myself quite enough. I'm muting myself.
Yeah, well, good, because I was going to mute you if you didn't. Okay. Thank you. Other techniques. We're coming down the home stretch. We've got about 15 more minutes to go. We can just stay on that, or we can just freewheel it. But look, I see John's box is lighting up. What do you got for us, John?
It's number 8 on my notes is energy level. And this was, people always talk about it, and some people don't even realize it. Some personalities are energetic and some aren't, but people want to listen to energy, whether it's the beginning of a question or throughout. So energy is there. I don't know if you can measure it. I don't know if you can hire someone to tell you got it. But everyone needs it. And especially in these podcasts, because people have in their ears, they're walking down the street, they're on a bicycle, they're on a train, and the energy level is up. They're just going to put them right to sleep. And I've heard people that just, well, that's the way I talk. Well, then don't do a podcast. That's harsh. Energy level. Toss to you, Charlie, Rob, Alex, what do you think?
Absolutely. I used to tell the story on this call that I had somebody reading an intro, and her energy level, this lovely young lady who was receptionist at an office I was at, and she read it like a robot. And I said, Colby, can you read it like you've had a drink? And she said, can I? And I said, no. I said, think like you've had a drink. At our other studio, we had a lot of booze because some people like to podcast and drink. I think it's nice if you can imagine you've had one drink and just sort of be somewhat ebullient, but not stupid. Sorry, I'll mute myself again.
I take this so seriously that I was looking to see if I have one. You won't really be able to see how you can kind of see it in there. Teaching trainers and speakers, I call them the great equalizers, which is energy and enthusiasm, and I firmly believe that people will forgive a lot of different things. Okay. The sound dropped a little bit. Okay. We did this for me in a room. Okay. You stumbled over a cord. Your slide didn't work, whatever. They'll forgive that. They will not and should not forgive a lack of energy and enthusiasm. And that's one of the few things I've used to coach basketball. 100% under our control. We all have our style. So that doesn't mean you have to be a jumping jack, but move that level wherever if you normally operate at a 5, we need it to be a 7. You know, if you're at a 7, take it to 8.5. But I don't litter my screen with information, but I will frequently put energy. Keep the energy up, particularly if, and I'm thinking of John here, if I'm doing 5 podcasts in 5 days or whatever, it would be only natural on number 3.5 to just let it go down. So I don't do it when I podcast, but for my entire career, since I was 22 years old, I've always had a form of a lightning bolt that I pin on before I speak. And sometimes people, you can't even see it, but it doesn't matter the podcast or what we did yesterday or the week before or 2 months ago. It's right here. It's right now. It's with, Kathy Thomas on this call, and it's bringing whatever you got. Last point, I'll leave it be. If you do 100 podcasts in a year, I don't care how many signs you put up. One's going to be the most energetic, one's going to be the least energetic, and 98 are going to be in the middle. But let's at least agree we don't fall asleep at the switch and forget to at least, give them everything in the tank, as Max Scherzer would say. Empty the freaking tank. We could do an hour on that. I take it extremely seriously. I can teach people last thing. I teach people 40 ways to keep audiences interested live, but none. Are you going to add all 30 of them together? Energy and enthusiasm, by far the most important one.
It's pretty neat you say that. When I originally recorded my intro, I listened back to it and I said, that's me. There's no energy. So I went back and figured out how to get energy. And I'll tell you the trick I use now, and everybody could modify it. I do 20 push-ups before an interview. Just get the blood flowing. I mean, I don't care if you do jumping jacks or walk up a flight of stairs or whatever, but I think just getting the blood flowing a little bit before you go in there it has been useful for me.
Yeah. I actually I usually bring, for me, a little bit of caffeine. I'll bring some tea or coffee. I got a podcast at 11 this morning, and I'll be filling up and just give it a little bit of gas. That's all. I did get my lightning bolt out of the package. So that's what it looks like. I don't know if you can see it.
Well, for me, I take Adderall. I mean, I'm prescribed Adderall. So I take it early in the morning. So I'm jazzed from the beginning to about 4 o'clock. So that caffeine's pumping through me as I'm doing my interview. So I got that energy going.
Yeah. Yeah. I also say, to those who are on this call, maybe with cameras off, et cetera, who are newer at this, take a deep breath, feel good, because what we're talking about right now, like we said, completely in your control. Alex, I love the way you kind of short circuited that and figured out a way. I would remind you that we're going to be our own worst critic. So I would be more interested in somebody listening to it, because I know I'll beat me up, to make sure that I'm still coming off authentically. Because I had to actually learn as a professional speaker when I was in Wisconsin and Minnesota and different places to actually dial back the energy, because it will annoy a live crowd if you come out there and go, how is everybody? So, they just easy there, joke boy. So
Rob, I do have a question for you.
Yeah, man.
What was your first interview like? Your first podcast?
Well, I did what Alex did. I lined up the first couple with people I knew, because I knew they were going to be sparring partners, and I was just going to be out there flailing away. And sure enough, I completely dominated the conversations. Felt I had to finish everybody's thought, but I just knew that it's like learning to swim, right, John? I mean, you can teach somebody for 4 days if you want, but eventually you got to go underwater. And when you do, you're going to have a little bit of water come out your nose and out your ear. But now you know what it's like to go underwater. So I thought there was only so much prep we could put in before I had to get somebody to interview. And my struggle was I've probably been on the guest side 1,000 times. I'm not on the host side. So, but that's what I did. Go ahead, John.
I just give advice for Alex. If you're just starting off here, that's good to listen and feedback. And energy is not manic. It's not bouncing off the wall energy. It's if you've ever started boxing, it's controlled energy. So it's controlled, and people can use a microphone. And Charlie knows these people. It's almost like it's like a horse whip or something. They have their body real slow and they can just whip it just right into that microphone. It's just, it's very amazing when you see people on WTOP, you see them doing it, you go, how did they do that? The voiceover people can do it. So you don't have to be manic, and it's not pounding the table, but it helps if you slow down and speed up. And it helps with that voice. And so, and also when you're asking questions, that helps too, because the speed up question, the slow down question, and the serious question, and it gets that verbal variety in the conversation. So people it's like humans. So you go to the store, there's fast talkers, slow talkers, big talkers. And that's within the podcast. They expect that variation. So vocal variety, and it's not manic. It's a horsewhip. It's like a hit a punching bag, it's not, it's speed more than anything, it's just boom. So good luck, Alex.
I call it, John, a cocktail for your ear. So you're trying to make something. If you also, the other way I think about it is, and I tried to imagine social media a couple years ago, I thought it's like everything in a house having a huge party. The TV's on, there's a guy standing on a stool talking out loud, there's newspapers on the table. And I tried to figure it out for what you were trying to talk about then, John. To me, it's just like, if we're sitting in a cocktail party and there's 5 conversations, which one is the most interesting to listen to? And it's just what you said, speeding down, going up, inflection, passion. Most importantly, that you're actually involved in the topic, because it's the boring conversation. I went to Spain too this summer. I'm not going to want to listen to that conversation or eavesdrop. Maybe I'd want to eavesdrop on the one where the people are passionate and excited and talking about interesting things. So sorry, just trying to bookend.
That's good. Bridget's got her hand up. I want to hear from you, Bridget.
I think it's a fine balance. I recorded my intro and I thought, gee, this is going to sound really great. And when I listened to it, I sounded very monotone and very soft. I'm like, what just happened? And every time I went back and tried to do it, I may have gotten a little louder, but it really wasn't, it didn't show my personality like I'm hoping you hear now. And it's a balance, and I'm trying to find that balance. I recorded this intro 1,000 times, and it still comes off very monotone. And hello, welcome.
I still go back to the Starbucks fact, which is if you and I, Bridget, were having coffee at Starbucks, I don't think you'd say, hello, would you like some cream in your coffee? You'd be like, hey, good to see you. It's just finding that natural rhythm. I don't want to shamelessly plug a book or anything, but I will tell you, get out of here. I will tell you that just to pick up on what was said, I call them the 3 Ps. Don't worry about it. I call them the 3 Ps: pitch, pace, pause. And when you really study authenticity, it's those 3 in no particular order, but allowing yourself to pause. Think about that, each of you, in terms of your interview skills. Somebody says something that's fairly deep, and you can always tell the amateurs, including me, when I'm not on my game, which is somebody who just has to immediately get the next question out, follow it up, let it sit. You want it to land. Let people feel that. And that's, obviously bring it up and down. Yeah, go ahead.
That's Milton Berle. He was the king of the pause. He could tell a joke and pause, and it was funny. The pause was funny.
Yeah.
So I think that's really valid. I also, to throw a wrench in that, Rob, I listen to a lot of podcasts on accelerated speed. Don't throw stuff at me, everybody. And because I now hear normal speed as being unbelievably slow, I try to speak a little faster in my interviews than I normally do if you and I are just in the coffee shop. I will tend to try to get not impossibly fast, because I had my engineer kick me once and say, hey, dude, are you on speed? And I was like, no, I'm just trying to make this more efficient. You know what I'm saying? He's like, well, that's a little too efficient. So, but I do try to speak, and I slow down and speed up, John, but I do try to get my cadence in a kind of a moving on. I'm trying to keep my end of the thing sort of moving, but I will slow down. And if somebody says, John's right, somebody says something worth a pause, a few seconds of dead air is incredibly valuable if it's done right. So sorry.
No, really good. Bridget, hand still up. What you want to jump back in?
I have lowered my hand.
All right. I have lowered my hand. And I got you, John. I just want to tell you, for those of you who do read me, I am going to write something called a blarticle. I am going to write a blarticle called the Starbuck Effect or something like that, because I really think it's interesting, the topic we're on, of finding that sound that we're really looking for. And for me, it's I think I know I get plenty of bounce when I'm at lunch with somebody. John, you and I had coffee a week or two ago, and I guarantee you people were moving their chairs away a little bit because there was some energy coming off that table. Go ahead, John.
I just have more advice for Alex. There's a woman in town named Diane Reen. I've known Diane for 40 years.
Boy.
And she's famous for saying that she'd listen to someone and she'd say, tell me more. And it was a pause and tell me more. And so that's a good crutch to have here in a situation where someone says something of a questionable nature. Well, tell me more about it. It's just, it's a nice open-ended discussion. And so you can use that. And she would use it like a hammer. She was great at it. And so Alex, that's the phrase that pays. Tell me more.
John, I used to volunteer answering the phones
At WAMU?
And I got to meet Diane. I have a 40-year crush on her. She's something special. She's really special. Yeah.
It's interesting.
That's my tip for the day.
Yeah, we all have our own little ticks and styles and stuff. My phrase is, I'd like to stay here a little bit longer. And but my guest immediately knows we're not going anywhere. And again, my favorite technique that fits my style is you can give me all the questions you want. I typically, if I'm interviewing somebody, it's 30 to 35 minutes. I'll be lucky to get through 6 questions because we're going to stay. I want to hear more. That's the whole idea. It's the second and third question that are going to make this interesting, deeper, not moving to the next question.
One thing too is to be able to read your guests. So if the guest is a good storyteller, some people are, some people aren't, some people need to be drawn out. But I had one guest in particular, the FBI guy, and he was an incredible storyteller. And literally it was on autopilot. And I didn't want to redirect him too much because he was telling such a good story. And then other people, you do need to prompt and, kind of try to redirect them a little bit. So part of it is knowing the personality and how good they are at telling the story and not getting in their way.
Yeah, I mean, that's very good. I've had a guest, Megan, who she was really good. She was telling her life story of how she got where she was. And I just didn't want to interrupt her because her story was just fascinating. I just let her go.
Yeah.
I actually, when I'm a guest, I don't do it to my guests, but when I'm a storyteller, nobody hasn't figured that out yet. And sorry, Meg almost spit her coffee out there. So, but I actually, whenever I'm interviewed, any questions for us before we start? I go, yeah. I can make a story 45 seconds long or 3.5 minutes long. You tell me your style of show, and usually the host will tell me. I'd like it to go back and forth. Okay. But I actually ask for permission of how long you want these things because that's what I do. Anyway, I sometimes, if I'm getting a hint that I've got somebody that likes to ramble, etc., I'll actually tell them, like to keep the stories to X amount of time if we can, and I'll poke at it, I promise. So, but I guess it's just a lot of conversation up front.